There was more than just drama in that courtroom, so stop whatever you're doing. A full-fledged explosion occurred. The judge pounded his gavel, jurors leaned forward, cameras flashed, and then it occurred. With tears in his eyes and a trembling voice, King Harris T's arrogant son rose to his feet and uttered the words that no one had ever imagined hearing. "I apologize." But hold on, King made the ultimate betrayal before the room could even breathe. He wasn't only sorry. He yelled and pointed his fingers directly at his own father. He was the one. T forced me to do everything. Can you imagine it? Fan hands gripping their phones, reporters gasping. Tiny's face was covered with horror. In a matter of seconds, the courtroom transformed from quiet to commotion. Law and order wasn't in play here. This was real life, unadulterated, unrefined, and going viral. The world is now wondering if King finally gave in to pressure or if he simply revealed the most sinister secret hip-hop has ever attempted to conceal. Is this the biggest betrayal in music history? Or is it just survival? Don't blink, because everything T created could be destroyed by what King disclosed in that hearing. And believe me, this is just the start. Nothing could stop the eruption that followed King Harris's confession, even if the gavel rang like thunder. Time stood still for a moment. The once celebrated monarch of the South, T, sat still, gazing at his son as if he had just witnessed a ghost emerge from the afterlife. Tiny gripped her chest tightly. As the gallery's patrons gasped, phones sprang up to capture the moment, and hashtags appeared seconds later. Became viral on the internet. #KT activates T, #courtroom bombshell, #destroyed dynasty. However, this was not a chance occurrence. Even though it was a startling moment, it had been building for years. Years earlier, T himself had forewarned his kid on video, the websites had conjectured, and the streets had murmured. Prison will devour you if you don't slow down. Irony is insufficient to describe their situation, as they were stuck in a courtroom together as adversaries rather than relatives. First came the apologies, gentle and almost pathetic. King turned to the judge and his voice broke. "I am aware of my errors. I am aware of my family's embarrassment. I only want to say I'm sorry for what I did." For a moment, the room seemed to soften, as if perhaps this was simply another famous youngster confessing to his mess. Then, however, something happened. He exploded the truth bomb while turning to face his father. In actuality, though, it wasn't just me. Clifford Harris, my father, forced me to do it. He was responsible for the transactions, the illicit money, and the weaponry. The courtroom fell apart. Reporters hurried to text editors after scurrying from their seats. A woman in the gallery yelled, "Oh my God!" as the judge screamed for order and slammed the gavel once more. However, the mayhem was uncontrollable. This was no longer testimony. It was a historical betrayal. King wasn't done yet. His voice grew louder despite his shaking hands and tear-streaked visage, sharpening each word. In order to keep himself clean, he instructed me to carry the pistols. To avoid being stopped by the authorities, he instructed me to operate the vehicles. Imagine hearing him say, "Even if it destroyed me, the empire must live on through me." The kid who formerly talked about his last name like a badge of honor and showed off his fancy automobiles on Instagram is now using a few shaky lines to reduce his father's empire to rubble. On TMZ, a Shakespearean tragedy was unfolding. T, on the other hand, said nothing. His eyes flitted and his jaw tensed. But he said nothing. Some whispered it was guilt, but others called it shock. However, the moment a father realized his own lineage had sliced him open in front of the world was captured on tape. By news outlets had already framed the story over the lunch break. Every television portrayed King Harris snitching on his father in court. Legal analysts were hurriedly booked by talk shows. Social media divided in two, and gossip blogs overflowing with theories. King was hailed by some as a heroic young guy who refused to be sacrificed by a father intoxicated by power. Some accused him of being a snitch, a pampered child who would be willing to betray his family in order to protect himself. Once a representation of Southern hip-hop supremacy, the Harris name was now a target for abuse on the internet. But don't get me wrong, this was more than gossip. Prosecutors were salivating behind the scenes. The case was completely unraveled by King's testimony. According to courtroom insiders, FBI sources, and leaked documents, the apology wasn't practiced. It had nothing to do with a legal plan. It was unplanned, unpolished, and devastatingly powerful. With an insider destroying the empire from within, the prosecution finally got what they had long desired. Meanwhile, supporters gathered with placards outside the courthouse. While some scrolled "lock up" in bold characters, others read "Free King." Overhead news helicopters captured the chaos. It was dubbed the trial of the decade by many, not only due to the accusations but also because of the fundamental betrayal. When a son publicly apologizes while simultaneously disparaging his father, family drama isn't all of it. The spectacle is worldwide. Tiny's response made headlines of its own. Her lips were captured on camera as she said, "Not like this." She let the tears fall down her cheeks. She had been the glue that kept the Harris family together for years, despite public arguments, reality TV instability, and cheating suspicions. But even for her, this was too much. Her cries reverberated down the hallway as she exited the courtroom in the middle of her testimony, accompanied by bodyguards. "Tiny can't take the truth" was the caption that went viral for that particular footage alone. King continued inside. He related how T allegedly gave him orders to deliver packages on certain nights. He described intimate discussions in which his father reportedly chuckled about washing his hands. While his son bore the brunt of the criticism, each phrase added to the pile of mistrust. And even if defense lawyers protested, yelled about hearsay, and sought evidence, the damage had already been done. It had been heard by the jury. Everyone had heard it. King Harris was more than simply a witness by the end of the day. A weapon of mass destruction, he was. Decades of meticulously constructed image had been destroyed by a single witness. T was no longer merely a rapper. He made the news. A hip-hop mogul's son betrayed him. The next surprise landed before the cameras had even calmed down. The FBI chose to add gasoline to the fire while the media was still in shock after King Harris's accusation against T.I. Grainy yet damaging, the leaked video slammed onto the internet. It included a hazy figure inside a studio, weapons resting against the wall, cash stacked high on a table, and a voice that uncannily resembled T.I. saying, "Remember that you fall alone if they ever catch you." The video went viral more quickly than wildfire. Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter all become battlegrounds. Some others cried out that it was doctored. The timing was too good, but some insisted it was the smoking gun. The leak gave King's testimony legitimacy just hours after he testified. One thing was certain, but fans were unsure of what to trust. Officially, the Harris dynasty was radioactive. Prosecutors moved across the courtroom like blood-smelling sharks. Printouts of what they said were FBI transcripts, allegedly intercepted communications between T and unidentified associates were displayed. The jury leaned forward at the words. Coded drop sites, shipments, and the terrifying line, "The kid will carry it." No one doubts him. The visual was sufficient to depict a father molding his kid into a fall guy, even if half of it was over the top. The meme began at that point. Images of King sobbing in court with the message, "Daddy made me do it." TikTok edits of T.I.'s previous music videos intercut with FBI records. As though this was already history, YouTube creators poured out explainers dubbed the rise and fall of the Harris empire. The trial was no longer about guilt or innocence in the eyes of the internet. It was for amusement. And wow, did folks enjoy themselves? But there was a darker river running beneath the mayhem. Receipts were dropped by anonymous accounts claiming to be insiders. Screenshots of purported communications that connect offshore accounts to Harris Entertainment Fund's accounts. Images of extravagant gatherings when politicians socialized with convicted criminals. The most terrifying assertion is that this case involved more than just guns and narcotics. It was about hiding something considerably more significant. From Atlanta to Washington, there was a web of corruption. Consider the headlines. It seemed ridiculous, ranging from federal conspiracy to rap royalty. However, When King Harris accused the court of treachery, everything appeared to be conceivable. The fans felt conflicted. King, according to some, showed courage by severing the bonds that bound him to a criminal past. Others cruelly dragged him, accusing him of being weak for betraying the guy who had saved his life. It was a vicious divide. It was a vicious divide. Hashtags that fought for supremacy included hashtag King Nenich and hashtag Freaking. Even famous people began to comment. The conversation was not only nasty, it was war. A well-known rapper from Atlanta tweeted, "This ain't it, dude. You don't snitch on blood." In response, a TV host said, "So y'all are furious at King for stating the truth, but not with T.I. for putting his son in that position?" Tiny remained silent during it all. Her Instagram, which is typically filled with family portraits and advertisements, became silent. Any statement was overshadowed by the quiet. Like vultures circling the remaining remnants of a carcass, fans flocked to her most recent post, leaving thousands of comments along the lines of, "Say something, Tiny. Are you standing with T or with King? The family is done." Nobody was prepared for the leaks that followed. A document evidence from the Harris case also appeared on Reddit and spread around Telegram groups. There were briefcases full of cash, containers stamped by the military, alleged FBI images, and hazy stills showing guys in suits shaking hands with T. Was it authentic? Who could have known? It didn't matter, though, in a time when perception is reality. The pictures spread like wildfire, making the Harris name a byword for controversy. Additionally, late-night hosts jumped on it. The audience burst out laughing when someone said, "Looks like T should have changed his name to C.I., as in criminal informant." One person commented, "King Harris just gave the best Father's Day gift ever and an arrest warrant." The Harris family had turned into a joke. And once you're joked about, you can't get back on your feet. Is nearly difficult. In the meantime, the defense fumbled in court. According to T.I.'s attorneys, the video was phony. Prosecutors were manipulating that King and staging the leaks. However, their words were incoherent. The shout of public opinion overpowered all objections. Despite being sworn to impartiality, jurors were still people. And people browse Instagram. They view TikTok. The memes are visible to them. They sense the strain. The FBI was no longer even hiding by the middle of the trial. They alluded to more extensive inquiries into financial irregularities while confirming that they were examining information related to the Harris case. The music industry was rocked by that sentence alone. Who else would fall with T.I. if it did? Him. The consequences were immediate. Endorsements retreated. Quietly, radio stations ceased playing T.I.'s classics. Streaming services stopped offering playlists. The empire was collapsing in real time, one canceled agreement at a time. And even old collaborators made carefully phrased statements like, "We're waiting for the facts." But this situation is serious. Additionally, King, the young man who used to show off his Ferraris on Instagram, was now in protective custody and was said to cry every night. According to some reports, he felt bad for snitching. He was relieved, according to others. In any case, his reputation was irrevocably altered. He was no longer only T's son. He was the young man who broke down and came clean in front of millions of people. He was the Judas of hip-hop. Admirers was unable to stop arguing. Was he a hero or a coward? Either an opportunist or a victim. It became a nasty split. It was no longer merely a trial, as some remarked in the comment sections. At least he told the truth. Others spit out, "He'll never show his face in Atlanta again." A cultural reckoning took place. New leaks by the second week hinted at even more sinister secrets. Cover-ups of disappearances connected to the Harris empire were suggested via whispered recordings. Whistleblowers were coming out to attest that the family's influence went well beyond the music industry. According to anonymous blogs, every leak was fuel. Every rumor evolved into a new hot subject. The most absurd aspect was that none of this was slowing down. It was accelerating, if anything. Courtroom drama had given way to a full-fledged international conspiracy in the Harris case. Anchors on the news did it best. We are not only observing a trial. We are seeing an empire's collapse. A disturbing truth reverberated as the court adjourned for the day. The treachery was just the start. The FBI files, the leaks, the actual storm, and the outcry from around the world were still coming in. And this movie broke the walls if it broke the foundation. With flashing cameras, yelling reporters, and irate supporters, the courthouse steps had turned into a battlefield. Crowds got bigger every day, and the chants got louder every day. One side screamed, "Lock him up!" The Free King yelled the another. Even Steele was unable to control the turmoil despite police roadblocks. This was no longer merely a trial. The Harris family was the unwelcome star of the circus. There was a lot of tension in the courtroom. Driven by King's treachery and the FBI's well-timed leaks, the prosecution intensified its efforts. Audio recordings purportedly taken from encrypted devices were played. There were gasps throughout the room when the voice, which was obviously T.I.'s, mumbled, "Move the shipment tonight. Don't let the kids screw it up." The jurors wrote notes. The judge's expression hardened. The harm was already irreparable, whether it was genuine or not. King avoided his father's gaze as he sat at the witness stand with his head bent. He felt as though every word he had said in the previous days was like chains around his neck. The streets would never forgive him, he knew. Here, however, survival was more important than devotion under oath. Everything was captured by the cameras. The tremor in his palms, the quiet tears, and the quiver in his lip. Videos of his collapse quickly went viral. Prosecutors moved like sharks tasting blood. Inside the courtroom as TikTokers remixed it with subtitles, like the day hip-hop royalty collapsed. Printouts of what they said were FBI transcripts allegedly. Intercepted communications between T and unidentified associates were displayed. The jury leaned forward at the words, "Shipments, a cooling line, and designated drop points. It will be carried by the child. No one challenges him." The imagery was sufficient to depict a father molding his son into a fall guy, even if half of it was over the top. The meme began at that point. Images of King sobbing in court with the message, "Daddy made me do it." TikTok edits of T.I.'s previous music videos intercut with FBI records. As though this was already history, YouTube creators sent out explainers dubbed the rise and fall of the Harris Empire. The trial was no longer about guilt or innocence in the eyes of the internet. It was for amusement. And wow, did folks enjoy themselves. But there was a darker river running beneath the mayhem. Receipts were dropped by anonymous accounts claiming to be insiders. Screenshots of purported communications that connect offshore accounts to Harris Entertainment Fund's accounts. Images of extravagant gatherings when politicians socialized with convicted criminals. The most terrifying assertion is that this case involved more than just guns and narcotics. It was about hiding something considerably more significant. From Atlanta to Washington, there was a web of corruption. Consider the headlines. From federal conspiracy to rap royalty. It sounded ridiculous. However, when King Harris accused the court of treachery, everything appeared to be conceivable. The fans felt conflicted. King, according to some, showed courage by severing the bonds that bound him to a criminal past. Others cruelly dragged him, accusing him of being weak for betraying the guy who had saved his life. It was a vicious divide. Hashtags such as #freaking and #King the Snitch fought for supremacy. Even famous people began to comment. While a TV host responded, "So, y'all mad at King for telling the truth, but not at T.I. for putting his son in that position?" A well-known Atlanta rapper tweeted, "This ain't it, bro. You don't snitch on blood." The debate wasn't just messy. It was war, and Tiny remained silent throughout. Her Instagram, which is typically filled with family portraits and advertisements, became silent. Any statement was overshadowed by the quiet. Like vultures circling the remaining remnants of a carcass, fans flocked to her most recent post, leaving thousands of comments along the lines of, say, something, Tiny, are you standing with T or with King? The family is done. Nobody was prepared for the leaks that followed. On Reddit, a file titled Harris Case Evidence 2 appeared and spread around Telegram groups. There were briefcases full of cash, containers stamped by the military, alleged FBI images, and hazy stills showing guys in suits shaking hands with T. Was it authentic? Who could have known? It didn't matter, though, in a time when perception is reality. The pictures spread like wildfire, making the Harris name a byword for controversy. Additionally, late-night hosts jumped on it. The audience burst out laughing when someone said, "Looks like T should have changed his name to CI." As in criminal informant, the Harris family had become a joke, and someone else commented, "King Harris just gave the best Father's Day gift ever, an arrest warrant. Gave the best Father's Day gift ever, an arrest warrant."